The mic drops. The room goes silent. For a split second, the air itself seems to hesitate, caught between disbelief and the echo of the words that just tore through it. On stage, Donald Trump stands with that familiar half-smirk, his chin tilted upward, the confidence of a man who knows exactly the grenade he's just lobbed. Cameras flash. Reporters scramble. Somewhere in the crowd, a gasp slices through the noise like glass. It was supposed to be another rally, another performance, but this line, this one, hit differently. He leans into the mic, repeating it for effect, his voice dripping with derision. Obama's legacy? Overrated. All talk, no results. The crowd reacts in waves, some laughing, some booing, others frozen in uneasy silence. Even his own supporters glance sideways, unsure if they should cheer or wait to see where this goes, because this wasn't just an attack on a man. It was an attack on memory, on an era that millions still carry in their hearts like a badge of hope. For so many, Obama wasn't just a president. He was a mirror reflecting possibility, a symbol that said you belong too. And in that room, filled with bright lights and restless eyes, Trump's words felt like an attempt to shatter that mirror. The cameras catch every flicker, the tightened jaws, the uncomfortable glances, the flickering screens of phones going live across the world. Within seconds, hashtags begin to form. The room's tension spreads beyond its walls, spilling into living rooms, offices, and cafes where people stop mid-sentence to replay what they just heard. But amid the shock, something else brews, not outrage, not yet. Something quieter, more dangerous, anticipation. Because everyone knows when you take a shot that bold, you invite an answer just as powerful. And history has a way of answering back. Somewhere backstage, someone whispers, "He shouldn't have gone there." And as the crowd murmurs, unsure whether to applaud or hold their breath, the cameras pan toward the edge of the stage, where a calm, knowing expression waits in the shadows. The room doesn't know it yet. But what's about to unfold will silence more than just applause. It will redefine the moment itself. But what happened next left the entire nation in disbelief. In the hours that followed, the sound bites spread like wildfire, looping endlessly on cable news, dissected by pundits, replayed by influencers hungry for clicks. Obama's legacy? Overrated. The phrase became both weapon and wound. For some, it was validation. For others, it was a betrayal of something sacred. And beneath the noise, one truth pulsed steady. This wasn't just political theater. It was an identity test for an entire nation still deciding who it wanted to be. Because Obama's legacy isn't merely policy on paper. It's a memory of decency, intellect, and the audacity of hope in an era that felt starved of it. For millions of Americans, especially immigrants and people of color, his presidency had said something that history had rarely dared to whisper: you belong here. His rise had redefined what was possible, and his calm, even in the face of hatred, had modeled what leadership could look like when dignity led the way. Trump's attack cut deeper because it wasn't just about numbers or laws. It was about erasing that feeling, that fragile progress that said America could stretch its arms wide enough for everyone. It was confrontation versus composure, noise versus nuance. A brash, relentless style colliding with the memory of a leader who chose grace when others chose chaos. The country, divided as ever, felt that collision instantly, one half thrilled by defiance, cheering the audacity, the other half clenched in disbelief, hearts aching as old scars reopened. On Twitter, hashtags became battlefields. An Obama legacy trended alongside Nog's truth hurts. Comment sections became confessionals, each post revealing what people feared most, that the era of decency was slipping away, that cruelty was being rebranded as strength, and yet, beyond the shouting, an undercurrent of something else stirred: urgency. The kind that crawls under your skin and whispers that silence is no longer an option. Because if legacies can be dismantled in sound bites, what hope is left for truth itself? What happens when dignity becomes the punchline, when unity is mocked as weakness? For immigrants who'd once watched Obama's rise as proof that hard work and faith in America still mattered, Trump's dismissal felt personal. It wasn't just an insult to a former president. It was a challenge to their own belief in the promise of belonging. For the young, it was a warning that progress, no matter how inspiring, can be undone with a single sneer from a podium. The networks called it political strategy. But for the people watching, the teachers, the nurses, the small business owners, the dreamers, It was something deeper, a test of moral endurance. Could the values of empathy, humility, and shared purpose survive in an age that rewarded spectacle over substance? The tension wasn't just political. It was spiritual. One vision of America, bold but bruised, diverse but hopeful, stood toe-to-toe with another that thrived on division and dominance. The stakes weren't about two men anymore. They were about what kind of country would emerge from their shadows. And as the clip played again and again, the divide grew louder, hotter, more desperate. People waited for someone, anyone, to answer back, not with anger, but with truth. Because deep down, the nation knew what was really being fought for. Not policy points, not applause lines, but the very soul of respect itself. The air around that moment thickened with anticipation. Everyone could feel it. Something was coming, and as Trump's words echoed through the hall, no one could have predicted the reaction that followed. Donald Trump's rise was never quiet. It was thunder breaking through the calm, a force that fed on spectacle, not substance. Long before politics, his name was a brand, his image a performance. Gold letters, tall towers, louder boasts. In every room he entered, he demanded the spotlight, thrived on the gasp. To his fans, he was the embodiment of unapologetic confidence. To his critics, the personification of ego untethered. But no matter the view, one truth remained constant. Donald Trump understood power as theater. And in that theater, controversy was his standing ovation. When he descended that golden escalator in 2015, the script for American politics was rewritten. The old language of diplomacy was replaced with blunt soundbites that cut deep and trended faster. He didn't just challenge norms, he shattered them, piece by piece, with the certainty of a man who believed restraint was for the weak. Every insult, every tweet, every late-night rant was both a weapon and a performance. He understood that outrage drove ratings, and ratings were currency. But beneath the bravado, something more personal simmered, an obsession that had followed him for years. Barack Obama. It wasn't just political rivalry. It was fixation. The former president represented everything Trump was not. Measured where he was impulsive, eloquent where he was inflammatory, beloved in circles that once dismissed Trump as a caricature. Obama had what Trump coveted most, legitimacy. And for a man who built his empire on image, that legitimacy was the one currency he couldn't buy. Their clash began long before that rally. It started in the shadows of the birther conspiracy. Trump's self-fashioned crusade to question Obama's very identity, to make America doubt the man who embodied its highest ideals. He didn't just want to win an argument. He wanted to rewrite the narrative of who deserved to lead, to strip Obama's legacy of its moral armor and leave it vulnerable to mockery. It was personal theater disguised as patriotism, and it worked, for a time. The chaos, the headlines, the shock factor, all became oxygen for his movement. Trump learned that each attack drew him closer to dominance. Each insult became proof of his power. To his base, he was a disruptor, the man brave enough to say what others wouldn't. But behind that swagger was something else, a dependency on conflict. He needed an enemy, someone to define himself against. Without that contrast, the show lost its tension. Obama, with his calm, his poise, his almost frustrating refusal to engage, became the perfect foil. Trump's energy came from breaking things. Obama's came from building them, and in that polarity, the political drama of a generation was born. Every jab Trump threw seemed to bounce off Obama's silence, a silence that only made him angrier. It wasn't the kind of silence that surrendered. It was the kind that disarmed. Over the years, Trump's attacks evolved from personal to historical. He didn't just criticize Obama's policies. He aimed to erase his presence. Reversing achievements became a ritual of defiance: healthcare, climate accords, diplomatic bridges. Each rollback was a symbolic strike, a declaration that the past 8 years were nothing more than a mistake to be corrected. But no matter how many policies he dismantled, one thing he could never uproot was the emotional imprint Obama left behind, the hope that ordinary people mattered, and that's what gnawed at him. Because Trump understood showmanship, but he never mastered resonance. His speeches drew crowds, but not hearts. His victories commanded attention, but not affection. He could dominate a room, but not inspire a generation. And deep down, even he knew it. That insecurity, buried beneath layers of bravado, fueled his need to take one more swing, louder, harsher, more public than before. So when he stood on that stage and took aim at Obama's legacy, it wasn't just a political jab. It was the culmination of years of resentment, a man desperate to prove he could outshine a shadow that refused to fade. The attack wasn't strategic. It was instinctive. The kind of move made by someone who believed he could bend history through force of will alone. But arrogance, like gravity, always finds a way to pull its source down. Because the higher Trump climbed on spectacle, the more fragile his balance became. Each new controversy drew applause from loyalists but widened the silence from everyone else. The more he attacked, the more people began to see the cracks, the insecurity behind the swagger, the fear behind the fury. And on that night, when he fired his latest shot at Obama's legacy, it was supposed to be another victory lap. But this time something was different. The silence that followed wasn't submission. It was suspense, the quiet before the reckoning. But for all his bravado, there was one figure ready to meet him head-on. Before the silence, before the insult that echoed across headlines, there was a story, one that began long before the microphone, the rallies, or the politics. It was the story of a young man with a name that sounded unfamiliar to some and hopeful to others, who dared to believe that intellect, empathy, and faith in common ground could change a divided nation. Barack Obama didn't emerge from the machinery of power. He rose from its margins, a biracial child of two worlds whose very existence challenged the neat boxes America once used to define itself. His rise was improbable, almost poetic. A law professor from Chicago, a community organizer with no family dynasty, no inherited fortune, no entitlement to the corridors of power. Yet somehow he stepped onto the stage of history with a quiet conviction that decency was not weakness, it was strength. That persuasion could outlast provocation, that a nation built on struggle could still find beauty in unity. When he spoke, he didn't shout. He didn't need to. His pauses carried weight, his words painted visions. Crowds gathered not because he promised miracles, but because he made them believe they could create them. For the first time in a long time, the American story felt like it belonged to everyone. Immigrants, dreamers, factory workers, students, believers, skeptics. His campaign wasn't just political. It was spiritual. Yes, we can wasn't a slogan. It was a declaration of collective worth, and when he won, the image was indelible. A sea of faces in Chicago, tears glinting in the cold night air, strangers hugging strangers as if centuries of division had briefly lifted. For a generation who had known only cynicism, his victory was proof that the impossible could be reached, not by power, but by purpose. But hope, like light, casts shadows. From his first day in office, he inherited a nation broken by war, fear, and economic collapse. Expectations soared beyond human reach. Every choice he made was dissected under a microscope of doubt. And yet, through the noise, he carried himself with an unshakable calm, a steadiness that unnerved his critics. Where others sought confrontation, he sought conversation. Where others raised fists, he raised eyebrows and facts. His weapon was intellect, his armor, restraint. He faced ridicule for his composure. They called him detached, professorial, too measured. But beneath that calm exterior was fire, a deep moral fire that believed leadership meant listening when others shouted, standing tall when others postured. To millions, especially those who had felt unseen, his presidency was more than politics. It was representation. Proof that grace could still command respect. Obama's legacy was never just about legislation, though the achievements were many. Healthcare reform that gave millions a lifeline. Diplomatic bridges with nations once written off as enemies. A focus on education, empathy, and the simple idea that progress didn't have to mean cruelty. His administration, imperfect and human, carried an undercurrent of optimism, that America could still evolve toward its better angels. For immigrants, his story was oxygen. A man with a Kenyan father, a middle name that once drew suspicion, now leading the most powerful nation on earth. It sent a message that transcended politics. You don't have to erase yourself to belong here. For young people of color, his family became a mirror. Michelle's strength, his daughter's laughter, the image of a black family in the White House redefining what normal looked like. But even as he inspired millions, he also triggered a storm. His very existence exposed the fractures America had long tried to ignore. The backlash wasn't just about policy. It was about identity. Every stride he made toward unity seemed to awaken forces that thrived on division. And when he left office, the pendulum didn't swing gently. It snapped back with vengeance. Still, he didn't retreat. Out of power, he carried himself with the same measured dignity. No bitterness, no public feud, no desperate attempt to reclaim attention. He believed in letting history speak in its own time. But to those who followed him, his silence spoke volumes. It was the kind of silence that says, "I don't need to prove my worth. It's already written." And that's why Trump's attack stung deeper than words. It wasn't just a political jab. It was an attempt to unmake something sacred. Obama's legacy was a promise that America could be better than its cynicism, that power could coexist with kindness. To mock that was to mock every person who had dared to hope because of him. The irony was poetic. The man who built walls was taking aim at the one who had tried to build bridges. The man who thrived on division was mocking the one who had spent 8 years preaching unity. And yet, even as his name was dragged into the dirt, Obama remained still, watching, listening, waiting. Because he understood something his critics never grasped, that character isn't measured in moments of comfort, but in the calm that follows provocation. In homes across the country, people waited to see if he would respond. Would he finally break his silence? Would the man who preached, "When they go low, we go high," finally go low himself? The question burned on every timeline, every broadcast. He had weathered storms before, from birther lies to obstruction, from insults to mockery. Each time he chose the long game, and yet, even his most loyal supporters felt the tension this time. How do you respond when your life's work, your very symbol, is dismissed in front of millions? In that moment, America wasn't just watching a feud. It was watching a philosophy being tested. The belief that dignity can stand its ground against cruelty. The belief that light, even when dimmed, never truly disappears. And now, all that legacy was about to be tested. The moment came with no warning. The crowd was restless, cameras flashing, the air thick with the smell of lights, sweat, and ego. Trump stood at the podium, chest puffed, his hand slicing through the air with that trademark flourish that said he wasn't here to discuss, he was here to dominate. Then, almost casually, he dropped it, the line that would stop the room cold. "Barack Obama," he said, voice sharp with practiced disdain, "wasn't a great president. He was a great performer. All talk, no results. His so-called legacy, a myth built by the media." The words landed like a crack of thunder. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Reporters froze mid-type. The audience, half exhilarated, half appalled, seemed to inhale at once, the sound swallowed by the enormity of what he'd just said. Even for Trump, it felt like crossing an invisible line, a jab not just at a man, but at an era, a memory, a collective belief that still lived inside millions. Then came the murmurs. A ripple of disbelief swept through the hall. Cameras zoomed in, searching for reactions. Some supporters clapped uncertainly, their cheers awkward, hesitant, as if unsure whether to celebrate or brace for the blowback. Others shifted uneasily in their seats. And somewhere in that uneasy crowd, a few faces hardened, not in anger, but in quiet defiance. Because to them, Obama wasn't an abstract name. He was the reason their children believed in possibilities. The reason their accents no longer felt like barriers. The reason they could still look at their country and feel like it was theirs too. And now that story, that symbol, was being dismissed like a rumor. Trump, sensing the tension, smiled wider. He thrived in discomfort. It fed him. The sharper the silence, the deeper his satisfaction. "You all know it," he continued, leaning forward. "He left nothing behind but division. The only legacy Obama had was me, cleaning up the mess." Line drew gasps. The bravado was unmistakable, the self-styled conqueror rewriting history in real time. He turned the knife slowly, watching the reactions like a performer savoring his audience. But somewhere near the front row, a figure sat motionless, hands clasped, face calm. His eyes didn't waver. The camera panned, and the crowd collectively realized who it was. Barack Obama, the man whose name had just been dragged across the stage, sat in the audience, expression unreadable. He hadn't been scheduled to speak that night. He had come as a guest, a statesman. Yet suddenly, the entire focus of the room had shifted to him. Every lens turned. Every whisper stilled. It was no longer about Trump's words. It was about Obama's silence. How do you respond when your entire legacy is reduced to a punchline before your eyes? Would he rise? Would he fire back? The tension felt biblical, like the seconds before the first drop of a storm. Trump saw it too. He gestured toward him, half grinning, half taunting. Even he knows it, he said, pointing to Obama. Look, not even a word in his defense. The crowd gasped again, louder this time. It was a challenge, a provocation, and for a moment, Obama didn't move. His stillness was unnerving, regal, deliberate, almost serene. His hands rested on his lap, his posture unflinching. That calm, that poise, the same composure that had once inspired millions, was now being tested under the brightest, harshest lights. Around the hall, phones rose like stars in a night sky, thousands of tiny glowing lenses waiting to capture whatever came next. The live stream comment sections erupted. Say something. Don't let him get away with this. Classic Trump, no respect. The energy shifted from tension to hunger. The audience could feel history teetering on the edge. Trump waited, basking in the spotlight. He expected outrage. He expected a reaction he could weaponize, anger, indignation, a raised voice he could twist into weakness. But Obama remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed, his face composed in that same expression the world had come to know, calm resolve in the face of chaos. The silence grew unbearable. Even the lights seemed to hum louder. In that breathless stillness, Trump's confidence faltered, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. The smirk twitched. Because what do you do when your opponent refuses to play your game? When the storm you summon refuses to thunder back? It was a moment suspended in time. Two men, two Americas staring across the divide. One fed by provocation, the other defined by restraint. The crowd didn't know what to do. The country didn't know what to feel. But everyone understood instinctively that something larger than politics was unfolding. A confrontation between noise and nobility, arrogance and grace. The cameras kept rolling. The nation held its breath. Then, with the entire country watching, something unexpected happened. For what felt like an eternity, Obama didn't move. Cameras zoomed in, breaths caught mid-chest. The entire room balanced on a knife's edge. Trump leaned back, satisfied, certain that his words had landed clean and deep. The silence was his applause, or so he thought. Then slowly, Obama stood. Not abruptly, not defensively. It was a measured rise, the kind that spoke of patience, power, and purpose. He adjusted his jacket, his eyes meeting the crowd before landing on Trump, not with anger, but with the calm curiosity of a teacher watching a student test his limits. The audience leaned forward, phones trembling in the air. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It carried that quiet authority that once filled stadiums and stirred movements. You know, he began, pausing just long enough for the hush to deepen. I've noticed something about folks who spend all their time talking about someone else's legacy. It's usually because they're worried about their own. The crowd exhaled, a wave of murmurs, gasps, and muffled laughter rippling through the hall. The blow wasn't loud, but it hit like a thunderclap. Obama didn't gesture. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, letting the words do what they were built to do. Dismantle arrogance without breaking a sweat. Trump's smile faltered for the briefest second. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but millions watching would later replay that exact moment in slow motion. The predator blinked. Obama continued, his tone steady, almost reflective. Legacy, he said, isn't built by tearing others down. It's built by lifting people up, by believing that when one person succeeds, the country succeeds. That's the America I know, the America I still believe in. Applause began to swell, hesitant at first, then unstoppable. It wasn't a cheer for politics. It was relief, catharsis, pride resurfacing from beneath months, years of cynicism. The kind of applause that came from remembering something you thought you'd lost. Trump tried to interrupt, half smiling, waving his hand dismissively. Spare us the speech, he started, but the audience wasn't with him anymore. They weren't angry. They were awake. Obama's gaze never wavered. You can attack me, he said evenly. You can rewrite headlines, twist facts, spin stories, but you can't erase the millions who worked, sacrificed, and hoped, not for me, but for something bigger than any one person. That was the pivot. In one breath, he shifted the energy from personal defense to collective pride, turning the attack into a mirror. The crowd erupted. Even those who'd come neutral found themselves clapping. The cameras caught faces, young immigrants with tears in their eyes, veterans nodding quietly, journalists struggling to keep composure. Across social media, the moment exploded. Within minutes, your legacy lives trended globally. Clips of Obama's calm rebuttal spread across every platform, stitched with captions like "Grace under fire" and "This is how you handle disrespect." Even some of Trump's usual defenders hesitated, pundits blinking at monitors, unsure how to spin silence that spoke louder than any insult. But it wasn't over yet. Obama leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just enough that the audience had to lean in with him. "The thing about legacy," he said, "is that it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every teacher who stayed late grading papers, every nurse who worked through the night, every kid who dared to believe their name mattered. That's what we built together. That's what you can't take away." It wasn't a mic drop in the traditional sense. It was subtler, purer, the kind of rebuttal that doesn't shout but reverberates, the kind that doesn't need to end with applause, because the silence after it is even louder. Trump's confidence cracked. His grin stiffened into something forced, eyes darting toward the teleprompter, then the crowd. The swagger that once filled rooms now looked smaller, thinner, under the weight of a truth that didn't flinch. For once, he had no line to counter. No insult sharp enough to slice through calm dignity. The crowd had already chosen their side, and it wasn't the one shouting. Even in the back rows, something shifted. People who'd arrived skeptical, perhaps even dismissive of politics altogether, felt it. The contrast was too stark to ignore. Noise versus depth, ego versus grace, momentary applause versus timeless resonance. Obama didn't push it further. He didn't need to. He gave a small nod as if to say, "We're done here," then stepped back. The audience rose. The sound was massive now. Not chaotic, but unified, like an exhale that had been held for far too long. Trump stood still, caught in the glare of the moment he'd unknowingly created, one that no spin, no post-event rally could undo. And then came the visual, the image that would define the night. Obama turning away, unbothered, as Trump stood frozen behind the podium. No mic drop, no dramatic exit, just quiet, effortless composure. The photo hit every front page within hours. Grace outshines grievance. Meanwhile, online, the clip became a digital wildfire. People began stitching together Obama's words with moments from his presidency. The handshake with a janitor, the song "Amazing Grace," the line, "Yes, we can." Each post built on the other, a collective act of reclamation. By morning, even conservative commentators admitted begrudgingly that Trump had been outclassed. Late-night hosts replayed the exchange on loop. Hashtags turned into headlines, headlines into think pieces, and through it all, one phrase kept echoing. He didn't need to shout. He just needed to stand. Somewhere in the aftermath of applause and media frenzy, Trump tried to reclaim control. His campaign released statements, talking points, spin. But the damage was done, not to him politically, but symbolically. Because the moment wasn't about who won the argument. It was about who reminded America what dignity looked like. The next day, editorial columns spoke of the return of composure in chaos. Commentators said it wasn't just a defense of a legacy, it was a reminder that leadership doesn't require volume, just conviction, and maybe that's why the moment stuck. Because in a time defined by shouting, by endless noise and division, a single calm voice had cut through it all, reminding millions that strength doesn't roar. It resonates, as the crowd slowly dispersed that night. "The air still electric," one reporter whispered into her mic, almost to herself. The legacy stood taller than the attack. She was right, and in the quiet that followed, the consequences started to spread. By dawn, the country was humming. The clip of Obama's calm rebuttal had already crossed every algorithm, every feed, every corner of the digital world. It was the kind of moment that didn't need marketing. It spread because it meant something. On Twitter, "Your Legacy Lives" was no longer just a hashtag. It was an anthem. Instagram Reels played the slow-motion moment of Obama rising, paired with captions like, "This is leadership," and "Grace will always outlast noise." Cable networks ran the footage in loops. The chyron beneath read, "Obama responds," and the internet erupts. Morning hosts tried to dissect the psychology of it all, calling it a masterclass in restraint and a mirror held up to a divided nation. Even those who typically avoided political commentary couldn't help but weigh in. One popular YouTuber called it the cleanest clapback in political history, while a late-night comedian joked, "That wasn't a mic drop, that was a dignity drop." But behind the laughter was something deeper, a pulse, a sense of recognition. Millions of viewers who had grown tired of chaos, of shouting, of performative conflict, felt a rare kind of vindication. It wasn't about party lines. It was about tone, about how a single moment of grace could reclaim the moral center of a conversation that had long gone off the rails. In living rooms, cafes, and college dorms, people replayed Obama's words. Teachers used the clip to talk about composure under pressure. Activists shared it as proof that truth doesn't need volume to resonate. Parents told their kids, "This is how you respond when someone disrespects you, not with anger, but with clarity." Meanwhile, Trump's team scrambled. The silence that followed his jab had become the story, not the jab itself. On conservative talk shows, loyalists tried to reframe the narrative, calling Obama's response pre-scripted or smug, but the audience wasn't buying it. The clip didn't feel rehearsed. It felt earned. Polls began shifting subtly but noticeably. Approval ratings that had stagnated ticked upward for Obama-era policies, particularly among younger voters. For the first time in months, the national conversation wasn't about division, it was about dignity. A word people had nearly forgotten how to spell without irony. Late that night, a journalist tweeted something that captured the sentiment perfectly. "In an age where everyone's shouting," one man whispered, and the world heard him. Within hours, that tweet had over 1 million likes. It became a screensaver quote, a TikTok sound, a rallying cry. Memes of Obama's unbothered expression appeared with captions like "Grace wins again" and "The adult in the room returns." Even celebrities chimed in, from musicians quoting his words in concert, intros to athletes referencing him in post-game interviews. But perhaps the most powerful ripple came from ordinary people. A nurse in Detroit posted a selfie with the caption, "Legacy isn't about fame, it's about showing up when no one else will." A teacher in Texas shared, "He reminded us why we believed in hope in the first place." Across communities divided by politics, race, and exhaustion, there was a faint, collective exhale, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, integrity still had a voice. Even in Washington, the energy shifted. Lawmakers who had spent months in partisan gridlock suddenly spoke, cautiously, about the need for restoring civility. Editorials appeared under headlines, like "A Legacy Reawakened" and "The Day Dignity Fought Back." What was supposed to be a jab at the past had become a mirror for the present. And Trump? He didn't stay silent for long. The next morning, he posted a string of defensive messages, dismissing the moment as overrated and accusing the media of bias. But the tone felt different, less confident, more reactive. For once, he wasn't leading the narrative. He was chasing it, because while he spoke in exclamation points, Obama's calm had already won the punctuation war. The period had been placed, firm, final, elegant. In the following days, the legacy itself seemed to breathe again. Foundations saw surges in donations. Youth organizations quoted Obama's line, "Legacy isn't built by tearing others down." Editorial cartoons showed Trump's shadow fading behind a rising silhouette of the word hope, and even critics, begrudgingly, admitted the former president had done what few could, turned an attack into a rallying moment. What made it powerful wasn't just what he said. It was what he didn't say, the restraint, the refusal to meet chaos with chaos. It was proof that sometimes silence can thunder louder than outrage. By the week's end, newsrooms had moved on to the next cycle. But something in the public lingered. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about the rediscovery of emotional gravity, the kind that pulls people back to center. The moment didn't rewrite history, but it reminded America of what kind of history it wanted to write next. And as commentators debated what it all meant, a comeback, a cultural correction, a shift in tone, one thing became undeniable. Trump's words had sparked a moment meant to humiliate, but they had instead reignited reverence. Obama didn't just defend his legacy that night. He reminded people that legacy isn't a monument. It's a movement. But the story didn't end there. What happens next could shape the future of our political identity. In the days that followed, the headlines began to fade, but the feeling did not. Something subtle had shifted in the public consciousness, something that couldn't be captured by polls. It was as if a collective breath had finally been taken after years of holding it in. People weren't just reacting to politics anymore. They were reflecting on character. Because when Obama spoke that night, it wasn't really about Trump. It was about what America had almost forgotten. That strength doesn't require shouting. That leadership doesn't need humiliation to feel powerful. And that dignity, once mocked as weakness, still had the power to humble arrogance. The attack had been personal. The response had been universal. And that was the difference. For all his noise, Trump had framed legacy as something you could erase with a taunt. But Obama reframed it as something you could only earn, and no amount of mockery could take it away. That truth echoed across more than politics. It seeped into workplaces, classrooms, and homes, where people remembered that composure wasn't passivity, it was power. Dignity became a quiet rallying cry. Teachers reminded students that integrity mattered more than popularity. Workers shared clips from the moment as motivation to stay kind in cutthroat environments. Parents used it to teach their kids that confidence doesn't come from tearing others down. It comes from standing tall when others expect you to shrink. In that way, Obama's defense wasn't just of his own legacy. It was of everyone who'd ever been underestimated, interrupted, or dismissed. His calm was a mirror for every immigrant told to go back, every worker told to stay quiet, every person who had been silenced and chose, instead, to rise. And suddenly, the story stopped being about a former president and a political feud. It became about something larger, a reminder of who we aspire to be when the microphones turn off and the crowd disperses. Trump's moment of bravado had been designed to dominate headlines. But what lingered wasn't his punchline. It was Obama's patience. The dignity that outlasts mockery, the composure that turns conflict into reflection. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the applause, not the trends, not even the policy wins, but the courage to choose restraint when ego demands revenge. The quiet power of refusing to meet darkness with darkness, because somewhere deep down, we all know, the world doesn't change when the loudest person wins. It changes when the calmest voice reminds us what really matters. That night, Obama didn't just defend his legacy. He redefined it. He showed that leadership isn't about domination, but direction. Not about silencing others, but inspiring them to speak with purpose. His victory wasn't measured in applause, but in the quiet realization that grace is still possible in public life. As the days turned into weeks, the noise faded, but the lesson stayed. People began to see that legacy isn't built on moments of outrage, but on the daily act of choosing empathy over ego, compassion over chaos. And maybe that's what America needed, a reminder that real strength doesn't roar. It reassures that the truest legacy isn't left in marble or headlines, but in the hearts of those who witnessed grace when it mattered most. Because when dignity wins, the ripple reaches far beyond one room. It reaches the people watching from home, the children learning from example, the nation still searching for its reflection. And for one quiet, unforgettable night, America found it again. Trump took a shot at Obama's legacy, and for a few seconds the room went silent. But what followed wasn't just a comeback. It was a reminder of who we are when we rise above the noise. It wasn't about one man defending his record. It was about the power of composure, the strength of integrity, and the enduring truth that dignity still matters. That night proved something deeper. That legacy can't be shouted down. It lives in every person who believes service is greater than self-promotion, that empathy outlasts ego, that calm courage can still win in a world addicted to outrage. Obama's quiet defiance didn't just silence a room. It reignited a belief that decency isn't weakness, and that grace, when tested, only grows stronger. If you believe that legacy matters, if you believe that dignity wins, then share this story. Because stories like this don't just belong to history. They belong to everyone who refuses to surrender their values to the volume of others. Comment below, what does your legacy look like? What moment reminded you that restraint can be stronger than rage? And if you're part of the movement that still believes in truth over spectacle, in service over arrogance, in light over noise, hit subscribe. Join the community that celebrates courage, calm, and conviction. Because this moment was about more than one speech. It was about what we stand for, and who we choose to be when the world tries to make us forget. The mic may have dropped, the room may have fallen silent, but the message still echoes.